My brother looked me dead in the eye and said, "You've been freeloading here long enough. I want you out by the first of the month." He said it the same way someone cancels a subscription. Casual. Final. Like I was a line item he'd finally gotten around to cutting. I was holding a bag of groceries at the time. Chicken thighs, ibuprofen, a 6-pack of Ensure for my father, who'd been losing weight since the surgery. My brother was sitting at the kitchen table with his wife, both of them watching me like they'd rehearsed this. "You're joking," I said. He wasn't. The house smelled like it always did in October. Wood polish and something faintly damp from the basement. Outside, leaves had started collecting in the gutters. I'd cleaned them out twice already that fall. Nobody noticed. Nobody asked. I set the groceries on the counter without saying another word and walked to my room. Through the wall, I heard my brother say to his wife, "Finally." She laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that lives in the back of the throat. That was a Thursday. I lay awake that night, listening to the house settle around me. All its familiar creaks and silences. I thought about the water heater I'd replaced 18 months ago. $340 out of pocket because my brother said he was between paychecks. I thought about the property tax bill I'd paid the previous April when my father couldn't. The one that would have triggered a county lien if it sat another 60 days. I thought about the refinancing paperwork I'd helped my father navigate 3 years earlier, sitting with him at the kitchen table for 4 separate evenings, explaining every page because his reading glasses were broken and he didn't want to admit it. Then I thought about something else. Something I hadn't mentioned to anyone. Not once in 3 years. My name was on the deed, not as a secondary owner, not as a co-signer, as a co-borrower on the refinanced mortgage, which, under the terms of the agreement, gave me legal standing in any future sale, transfer, or disposition of the property. My father had insisted on it at the time, said it made him feel better knowing someone responsible was attached to the paperwork. My brother had been in Phoenix that week, handling what he'd called a business opportunity that dissolved. Like all his business opportunities, within the year, he never knew. My father forgot, or maybe he just never thought it would matter. I let them believe I was devastated. I wasn't, I was calculating. I'm 37 years old, I work in commercial real estate, not sales compliance. I review contracts for a living. I know what signatures mean. I know what co-borrower status means. I know what happens when someone tries to sell a mortgaged property without the co-borrower's consent. My brother did not know any of these things. That was about to become his problem. Some things you need to understand first, because none of this started with the eviction. After our mother died, I was 28, my brother was 33. The house question came up immediately. My father was 61, diabetic, recently retired, and genuinely uncertain about everything. My brother lived 4 hours away with his wife and made periodic visits that always somehow coincided with holidays and never with the less pleasant obligations of adult children. I was the one who stayed close. I was the one who drove my father to appointments and figured out which Medicare supplement plan actually covered his medications, and sat with him through the long grey afternoons when grief made the house feel like it was full of furniture that had nowhere to go. Moving in was never officially discussed. It just happened the way necessary things happen in families. Someone takes on a burden and everyone else pretends the burden chose them. My father and I never formalized anything. No rent agreement, no reimbursement schedule. I covered utilities, maintenance, groceries, medical co-pays. My brother contributed Christmas gifts and occasional commentary about how I should think about my own future. Advice delivered, I noticed, only when my future was funding his father's present. The refinancing happened because interest rates dropped and my father's original loan, taken out in 2009, had unfavorable terms. I found a better option through a credit union and walked my father through it. The loan officer added me to the mortgage at my father's request. I remember signing the documents at a small table near the back of a branch office on a Tuesday afternoon, fluorescent lights, lukewarm coffee, a stack of papers that took 40 minutes to get through. I filed my copy in a manila folder and put it in a fireproof box in my closet. Habit. When you work in compliance, documentation is instinct. My brother was never in that room. He was never in any of the rooms where the real work happened. For 3 years, this arrangement sustained itself. My father's health stabilized. I kept the house running. My brother and his wife visited every few months, stayed in the guest room, ate food I'd bought, and made pleasant conversation at dinner about their plans to eventually buy a place of their own, somewhere warmer, maybe outside the city. Then my father's health declined again, and my brother's plans changed. I didn't understand it at first. He started coming around more frequently, asking questions he'd never asked before, about the mortgage balance, the property value, the neighborhood appreciation since the early 2010s. I assumed it was concern. I revised that assumption when he sat me down in October and told me to leave. His wife had stopped working. They needed liquidity, and the house, according to my brother's arithmetic, was worth significantly more than what my father owed on it. A sale would solve their problems. He presented this like a fact of nature, like it was already decided. Dad agreed, he said when I didn't respond. Where would Dad go, I asked. We'd find him something, my brother said. Assisted living, maybe. He's going to need more support anyway. It would actually be better for him. That sentence, "it would actually be better for him," is one I will not forget. The smoothness of it, the way my brother's voice carried genuine conviction, the specific delusion of a man who has spent a lifetime reframing his own convenience as someone else's benefit. I said I needed time to think. He said I had until the 1st of November. I gave nothing away. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat at the edge of my bed looking at the fireproof box in the closet for a long time without opening it. That weekend, I drove to see my father at his rehabilitation facility. He'd been there 6 weeks following a hip fracture, making slower progress than anyone hoped. He looked thin in the afternoon light coming through the window. The room smelled like antiseptic and the particular loneliness of institutional carpet. I didn't tell him about the conversation with my brother. I just sat with him. We watched a college football game with the sound turned low. His team lost and he fell asleep in the second quarter. And I stayed another hour anyway, just being present in the way nobody had ever particularly noticed or thanked me for being present. On the way out, I stopped by the nurse's station and reminded them about his sodium restrictions, which had apparently been ignored at 3 consecutive meals that week. They said they'd note it. I wrote it down so I'd have a record to follow up on. The drive home took 40 minutes on empty Sunday highways. I thought about my brother's face when he'd said, we'd find him something. The ease of it, the absolute assurance that he could narrate my father's life into a more convenient shape. I thought about the manila folder in the fireproof box. I made an appointment with a real estate attorney for the following Wednesday. Her name was Ms. Abernathy. She had an office on the 4th floor of a building downtown, and she spoke with the careful efficiency of someone who had listened to a lot of family disputes and learned to extract only what was legally relevant. I brought the full mortgage file, my father's original deed, the refinancing agreement, and 4 years of bank records showing transfers I'd made toward maintenance, taxes, and insurance. She reviewed the documents quietly for about 15 minutes before looking up. "You're a co-borrower on this mortgage," she said. "Yes. Does your brother know?" "No." She set the papers down. "He can't force a sale without your cooperation. And if your father is in rehabilitation with diminished capacity, he may not be able to consent to one either, depending on how his physicians would characterize his current condition." I hadn't thought about that second part. I filed it away. "What are my options?" I asked. She walked me through them. I could do nothing and let my brother discover the problem on his own when he approached a title company or a buyer's attorney. I could proactively assert my interest in the property and force a negotiation, or I could pursue partition, a legal mechanism that compels co-owners to either agree on a sale or have the matter decided by a court. "Which one gives me the most leverage?" I asked. She almost smiled. "The one where he finds out at the worst possible moment." I hadn't planned for revenge. That's the honest answer, and I've thought about it enough to be certain. What I wanted was proportion. My brother had spent years treating the house like inherited furniture, present in his life without any of the effort that kept it intact. He wanted to convert it to cash, with the same casualness he'd converted every other relationship in his life to something he could extract value from. What I wanted was for that casualness to cost him something. I did nothing for 3 weeks. I went to work. I visited my father twice, bringing him books he liked and the good coffee his doctor hadn't restricted. I answered my brother's texts with brief, cooperative responses. He was already in contact with a real estate agent. He sent me listings for apartments in my price range. He framed this as helpfulness. I thanked him. I did not tell him about Ms. Abernathy. On a Monday in early November, my brother called to tell me a buyer had expressed interest in the house and he'd be arranging a showing the following Saturday. He asked if I could make myself scarce for a few hours. "Sure," I said. "Great," he said. There was relief in his voice. He thought the hard part was over. He called back 48 hours later. His voice was different. "The agent says there's a problem with the title," he said. "Something about the mortgage, co-borrower status." I let a beat pass. "What kind of problem?" "She's saying they can't proceed with the sale without your signature." "Huh," I said. "Did you know about this?" I said, "I signed the refinancing paperwork with Dad a few years ago. I remember the loan officer mentioning it." The silence on his end lasted long enough that I could hear traffic in the background wherever he was. Then, "Why didn't you say anything?" "You didn't ask me about the mortgage," I said. "You told me to leave." Another silence, longer this time. "We need to talk," he said. "Yeah," I said, "we do." We met at a diner about halfway between the house and my office, a Tuesday morning when the place was mostly empty. My brother arrived first. He was dressed like he had somewhere to be afterward, which meant he'd expected this to go a certain way. His wife had wanted to come. He'd apparently talked her out of it, which I suspected was the first intelligent thing he'd done in months. He ordered coffee. I ordered the same. We sat across from each other at a booth near the window and watched the parking lot for a moment before either of us spoke. "I'm not trying to cut you out," he said finally. I looked at him. He was 42 years old and looked it in that particular way that accumulates when someone has spent years choosing comfort over accountability. Not old exactly, just worn in ways that show. "That's actually exactly what you were trying to do," I said. "You told me to leave by the 1st of the month. You were showing the house to buyers. You'd already picked out Dad's assisted living options. Dad needs more care. Dad needs," I said, "to not have his house sold out from under him while he's in rehab recovering from a broken hip." I kept my voice level. "And I'm the person who has been providing his care, paying his bills, and managing his property for 4 years. You drove down to tell me to get out." He stared at his coffee. "So what do you want?" he said. I had thought about this carefully. I'd talked it through with Miss Abernathy twice and sat with it alone for another week before I was sure. "I want an equal share," I said. "Not a favour, not an allowance. Legal co-ownership, documented with proper accounting of what I've contributed since Mom died. Mortgage payments, property tax, maintenance, utilities. All of it on the record. And if I say no, then we go to court and a judge decides what my co-borrower status is worth. That will take time, cost money, and become part of the public record." I paused. "Also, I'll be retaining counsel to examine whether Dad's current medical condition affects his ability to consent to any sale. Which means nothing moves until that's resolved." My brother set down his coffee cup. "You do that. I'm not doing anything except asking for what's fair," I said. "You're the one who started this. I'm just finishing it with documentation instead of arguments." He was quiet for almost a minute. Outside, a truck pulled into the parking lot and sat idling. "The agent thinks the house could go for around 410, he said. "Maybe 420. "I know what it could go for," I said. "I've been tracking the neighborhood since 2019. He looked at me then, really looked, the way people do when they suddenly realize they've been underestimating someone for years and can't quite reconcile it. It wasn't anger exactly. It was recalibration. "I need to talk to my wife," he said. "Take the time you need." I said, "I'm not in a hurry." That part was true. For the first time 4 years, I wasn't in a hurry about anything related to that house. The negotiation took 3 weeks. My brother consulted his own attorney, who apparently confirmed everything that Abernathy had told me. There was a period of roughly 5 days where his texts were clipped and his calls went to voicemail, which told me he was angry in the specific way people are angry when they realize they have no leverage. Then things softened. His wife, it turned out, was more pragmatic than he was. She pushed him towards settlement. The agreement we reached was this. I would be formally recognized as a co-owner, with a documented stake proportional to my financial contributions over 4 years. When the house eventually sold, with my father's full knowledge and consent once he was discharged and stable, the proceeds would be divided accordingly. My brother would stop pursuing a sale until my father was home, healthy enough to participate in the decision, and clear on his options. No assisted living railroading, no timelines built around convenience. My brother signed the agreement on a Wednesday afternoon. He did not look at me while he signed it, which felt appropriate. Some silences carry more weight than any apology. Word spread through the extended family the way it always does, selectively and with grievances already attached. My aunt called to tell me I'd been cruel. My cousin texted that family doesn't lawyer up on each other. I noticed that neither of them had commented on the 4 years I'd spent holding the household together without assistance, acknowledgement, or so much as a birthday card that arrived on the actual day. I didn't respond to most of it. Explaining yourself to people who've already decided you're the villain is a waste of energy I'd learned not to spend. My father came home in December. I'd prepared the house, grabbed bars in the bathroom, a ramp over the front step, his bedroom rearranged so he could navigate it with the walker. My brother helped carry boxes on moving day, which was the most physical labor I'd seen him contribute to the property in recent memory. We didn't talk much, we didn't need to. My father sat in his chair by the window that first evening and looked out at the yard for a long time. The oak in the front had lost most of its leaves. The gutters were clean. I'd done them in November. "The place looks good," he said. "It always looked good," I said. He turned to look at me. Something shifted in his face. Not guilt exactly. More like the recognition that comes when someone finally sees a thing that was always there. "I know," he said quietly. I know it did. That was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I got, and I found to my genuine surprise that it was enough. I hadn't realized until then how much I'd stopped needing the acknowledgement and started needing only for things to be accurate. On the record, real. My brother and his wife drove back to their place that evening. He shook my hand at the door, which was a gesture we'd never exchanged before. I didn't read too much into it. Gestures are easy. Consistency is harder, and I'd learned not to confuse the two. My father's health improved steadily through the winter. We fell into a quiet routine. Coffee in the mornings, the news, occasional errands, dinner early because he slept early. My commute was longer from the house than from my old apartment, so I left early and came back late, and the rhythm of it suited me. Some evenings, after my father was asleep, I'd sit on the back step with a beer and listen to the neighborhood. Distant traffic, a dog somewhere, the sound of wind through the oak when there was wind, the same sounds the house had always made. I'd just stopped noticing them somewhere along the way you stop noticing anything that's been continuous long enough to seem permanent. A year after that October conversation with my brother, I was sitting in Ms. Abernathy's office finalizing updated ownership documents. She slid them across the desk and said, "Most people who come in here want to fight. You just wanted the paperwork to match reality." I thought about that for a moment. The paperwork not matching reality was the whole problem, I said. She nodded like that was the most sensible thing she'd heard all week. On the way out, I passed through the lobby and stood for a moment in the afternoon light coming through the glass doors. It was October again, almost exactly a year later. The city was doing what cities do in fall, cooling, contracting, the light going golden and sideways through the gaps between buildings. I'd been called a freeloader in my own family's house, in the house I'd kept from being sold at a tax lien, in the house where I'd replaced the water heater and fixed the front porch step and driven my father to more medical appointments than I could accurately count. I'd been told to leave by the month's end by someone who had never once written a check for that roof, and the only reason any of it resolved the way it did, quietly, legally, without screaming or court battles, or my father caught between his sons like a man who owns nothing, was a piece of paper I'd signed 3 years earlier in a bank branch on a Tuesday afternoon and filed in a fireproof box. Documentation is the most underestimated form of self-protection in existence. People talk about family loyalty like it's something you perform, something measured in tolerance and silence, and the careful swallowing of what's owed to you. What they don't tell you is that loyalty performed without documentation is just labor with no paper trail. And labor without a paper trail is, in the eyes of most people who benefit from it, invisible. I don't tell this story to be bitter. I tell it because I spent years believing that being useful was enough, that staying close and showing up and handling what needed handling was a kind of argument that would eventually make itself. It didn't. What made itself was the filing cabinet. The receipts. The mortgage documents with my name printed where it mattered. My brother and I talk now. Not often, and not the way we talked when we were kids, before the years between us filled up with the different choices we made. But we talk. Last month he called to tell me his wife was pregnant. His voice was different, lighter in a way I hadn't heard in years. I told him I was glad, I meant it. Some breaks don't close all the way, some do. The difference usually has less to do with apologies than with what people are willing to make accurate going forward. My father is 73 now. He moves slowly, and there are harder days ahead. But he's in his house, in his chair, watching his yard change with the seasons the way he has for 30 years. The gutters are clean. The water heater is new. His medication is organized on the shelf in the kitchen where he can reach it. I kept a copy of every document in a second fireproof box now, stored at my office. Old habit, but also a reminder. The things that protect you most are usually the things you were careful about before you knew you'd need them.